Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Manifix. So today we're going to talk about a brand new commander from Jumpstart 2022, Preston the Vanisher. So Preston is a 2/5 legendary rabbit wizard for 1 white and 3 other. He has an ability that says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control and it wasn't cast, create a token that's a copy of that creature except it's a 0/1 white illusion. Then he has a second ability that says we can pay 1 white, 1 other, and sacrifice 5 illusions to exile target non-land permanent. So this commander is almost like a Panharmonicon, except he's not going to double our triggers unless we find another way to have our creatures enter the battlefield. So we're going to have to run cards like Cloud Shift, for example. It's sort of an interesting way to create that Panharmonicon-esque effect on a commander because it creates that additional 0/1 token, which allows us to combo in ways that we haven't really seen in ETB decks before. So let's take a look at our list and see how this deck runs. Now we'll kick things off with the ramp here. There's a ton of stuff you'll recognize here like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Mind Stone, Thought Vessel, and Prismatic Lens. Being a mono white deck, we also really want to run Pearl Medallion. This is going to make almost all of our spells cost 1 less to cast, which will provide an incredible amount of value over the course of the game. Another great card a little bit further up on the mana curve is Nyx Lotus. This is a 4 mana artifact that enters tapped, but it's going to tap for an amount of white mana equal to our devotion to white. Now, for those of you that haven't been playing since Theros, your devotion to white is the amount of white mana symbols on permanents that you control. So if we have even just a halfway decent board state, this artifact is going to put us ahead pretty quickly. We're not just running artifact ramp. We're also running some land ramp in mono white, if you can believe that. Knight of the White Orchid and Loyal Warhound are both 2 mana creatures that allow us to search our deck for a plains and put it onto the battlefield. They are conditional in that someone will need to have more lands on the battlefield than us when they enter, but early game, all that really means is that we didn't go first. Also, if we're playing even just one person that's running green, odds are we'll be down at least 1 land. And let's be honest, if it's a table of 4 people, there's gonna be someone playing green. These cards are also great because of their enter the battlefield triggers, which is exactly what our deck is built around. Deep Gnome Terramancer is another good one. Basically, if this is out, whenever one of our opponents plays a land ramp spell like Rampant Growth or something similar, we're going to search our library for a plains and put it onto the battlefield. I think this is a great card because it fits white in that it's conditional ramp, but at the same time it can be really good if land ramp is prevalent in your meta. I know it is in mine. Archaeomancer's map is similar too. When this comes in, we search for 2 plains and put those into our hand. Then it also acts as a conditional burgeoning, where we can play land whenever our opponents do if they have more lands than us. Finally, we're running everybody's favorite sad robot, Solemn Simulacrum. So the main theme of the deck is enter the battlefield effects, so we're going to have loads of those. Cards like Thraben Inspector, Wall of Omens, Spirited Companion, Inspiring Overseer, and Priest of Ancient Lore are going to make sure that we never run out of gas, especially if we're able to blink and or copy these cards. Ambitious Farmhand is also going to draw us cards in the form of lands to make sure we're hitting our land drops every turn. One really solid card draw engine for this deck is Mentor of the Meek. Many of the creatures we run in this deck are small, so power 2 or less is going to be pretty common. And every time one of those types of creatures enters, all we have to do is pay 1 mana to draw a card. Not to mention the fact that our commander makes 0/1 tokens, which will also trigger the Mentor's ability. Another form of card advantage that white happens to be pretty good at is Graveyard Recursion. Take a look at Extraction Specialist. Every time this enters, we return a card with CMC 2 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. Not only is this a great card on its own, but bringing something back from the graveyard this way is also going to trigger our commander's ability, allowing us to create a 0/1 token that's a copy of that creature, giving us another instance of this ETB effect. Another card similar to this one is Sun Titan, which is an absolute powerhouse in this deck. Whenever he enters or attacks, we return a permanent with CMC 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. Permanents that cost 3 or less are what make up a majority of our deck, so we should never really be short on targets for this ability. If we are able to keep Sun Titan out for multiple turns and take advantage of his triggered ability, we should be getting quite a bit of value out of him. Another card that can get stuff back from our graveyard is Karmic Guide. When this enters the battlefield, we return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Whatever we choose to get back with Karmic Guide will most likely have an ETB effect, and if Preston is on the battlefield, we'll be able to make a copy of that creature and double up on the trigger. Not all of our ETB effects deal with card advantage. Some of them, like Hanged Executioner, are going to make tokens for us. This card creates a 1/1 flying spirit when it enters. Blinking this with Preston on the battlefield will make a token copy, meaning we'll actually be making 3 creatures. The 1/1 spirit from the original when it enters the battlefield, the 0/1 copy of the Executioner from Preston, and then the 1/1 flying spirit token that the copy is going to make. If we're able to blink this at least once every turn, this is going to get out of hand pretty quickly. Another great token producer is Reverent Hoplite. When Reverent Hoplite enters the battlefield, we create a number of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens equal to our devotion to white. Again, since we're running a mono white deck, our devotion should be relatively high. It shouldn't be unusual to create 4 or more tokens whenever this creature enters the battlefield. Harmonious Archon is an interesting card here that is one you don't typically see very often. This creates 2 1/1 humans when it enters the battlefield. However, it also says that all non-Archon creatures have base power and toughness 3/3. So those 1/1s are actually going to be 3/3s. It's also going to buff most of our creatures because most of the creatures in our deck are smaller than 3/3. This card has a way of balancing out the board state because of that first ability. So as long as we can make more creatures than our opponents, we'll be ahead. Recruiter of the Guard is another great card with an ETB effect. With it, we can search our library for a creature with toughness 2 or less. That could be card draw, one of our combo pieces, or even target removal. As you might have guessed, the removal we're running in this deck comes in the form of creatures with ETB effects. One example of this would be Solitude, which is essentially a Swords to Plowshares on a creature, so we'll be able to exile a creature whenever it enters the battlefield. It has Flash and Lifelink, and we can cast it for its evoke cost by exiling a white card from our hand instead of paying its mana cost. Cavalier of Dawn and Aerial Extortionist both have the ability to remove any non-land permanent. Cavalier of Dawn destroys a target non-land permanent when it enters and gives the controller of that permanent a 3/3 token. It also has a dying trigger that returns an artifact or enchantment to our hand. Aerial Extortionist exiles a non-land permanent when it enters and when it deals combat damage. The drawback to this is that our opponents can recast the cards that we're exiling with it. However, whenever they do, we're going to draw a card. Not only that, but if they cast cards from anywhere other than their hand, we get to draw cards. So this is a great card draw engine against graveyard decks or decks that really like to cast their commander. Next up is Luminate Primordial, which is, again, essentially a Swords to Plowshares when it enters, except we get to target a creature for each opponent that we have. So if we're in a 4-player pod, we get to exile 3 creatures when this comes down. Leonin Relic Warden and Lauren of the Third Path can both remove artifacts and enchantments. Leonin Relic Warden will exile an artifact or enchantment. Lauren is going to destroy it, but then she also has the added benefit of giving us card draw. Now that tap ability is going to let one of our opponents draw a card as well. But what's nice about this is we can choose which opponent gets the card. So we might be able to strike a deal with this card, or at the very least give a little bit of help to that one player who's having trouble hitting their land drops. Finally, there's Fiend Hunter, which exiles a creature when it enters the battlefield. Now you might be wondering why we're running cards like Fiend Hunter. Yes, they remove a permanent, but that permanent gets returned if they leave the battlefield, right? Well, there's a couple reasons why. The first and most obvious reason is if we're able to copy Fiend Hunter with Preston, then we're exiling 2 creatures instead of just 1. But what if we could find a way to get around that second ability and just exile something for good rather than giving them a chance to get that creature back? Let's add an Ashnod's altar to the equation. Now let's pretend the altar, Fiend Hunter, and Preston are all on the battlefield. If we have a way to blink the Fiend Hunter with a card like Ephemerate, the Fiend Hunter comes into play and we target an opponent's creature that we want gone. Because the Fiend Hunter entered and wasn't cast, we get to make a 0/1 token copy of it. When the token comes in, the token's ETB trigger goes on the stack and we target the original Fiend Hunter. Now the token's ability resolves first and the original Fiend Hunter is exiled. Its leaves the battlefield trigger goes on the stack, but it doesn't have a creature to return as it hasn't exiled anything yet. Finally, the ETB trigger from the original Fiend Hunter resolves, exiling whatever we initially targeted for good. The reason Ashnod's altar is significant here is because we can then sacrifice the token to the altar and the original Fiend Hunter will come back, again triggering its enter the battlefield effect. Again, because Fiend Hunter entered and wasn't cast, Preston will make a token copy of it, starting this all over again. So we can repeatedly exile the Fiend Hunter with the token copy of Fiend Hunter, sacrifice the token, and generate infinite colorless mana from the altar, and permanently exile all of our opponent's creatures. This should win us the game, or at the very least, give us enough time to find a win condition. It's worth noting that this combo also works with Leonin Relic Warden, ridding our opponents of all of their artifacts and enchantments. Now with all these ETB triggers, we need to have plenty of ways to trigger them, which is where our blink cards will come in handy. Cloud Shift and Ephemerate are both 1 mana instants that will blink a creature we control. Ephemerate also has Rebound, so during our next upkeep we can cast this card again for free, which is really nice. Eerie Interlude and Lae'zel's Acrobatics are also great blink spells. These cards will let us blink all of our creatures, rather than just one, and at instant speed too. Lae'zel's Acrobatics also has us roll a d20. If we get 10 or more on the roll, we blink all of our creatures twice. If we're able to roll well with this, we're going to have loads of ETB triggers to resolve. Golden Argosy also has the ability to blink all of our creatures. It's a vehicle with crew 1, but when it attacks, we blink everything that crewed it. So we can tap any number of creatures we want to crew this thing, attack with it, and blink all of those creatures. It's also a 3/6, so it should be pretty safe to swing. Ghostway works in a similar fashion, except this card doesn't return our creatures to the battlefield until the end step. The downside to this is that we have to wait until the end step to resolve whatever ETB effects our creatures have. The upside to this card can also be used to save our board state from a board wipe. If someone attempts to cast Damnation, for instance, we can cast Ghostway in response. Then when Damnation resolves, we won't have any creatures to destroy. Then once that next end step rolls around, all of our creatures will come back and we'll be the only player left with a board state. Cosmic Intervention can also have this effect. What this says is the next time a creature we control would die this turn, instead exile it and bring it back to the next end step. A neat feature of this card is the Foretell ability. We can pay 2 of any color to put this face down on the battlefield. Then we only have to hold up 2 mana for this rather than 4. Glorious Protector works very similarly. We can flash this card in response to a board wipe to exile all of our creatures. Then, when Glorious Protector dies to said board wipe, all of our creatures will come back unscathed. Next up, we have Flicker Wisp and Charming Prince. These 2 cards will blink a creature when they enter the battlefield. Charming Prince is a little more versatile, as we also have the option to scry 2 or gain 2 life when he enters. Teleportation Circle is an enchantment that will let us blink 1 creature every turn at our end step. Next, we have Sword of Hearth and Home. This is a piece of equipment that gives a creature +2/+2 and pro green and white. When we deal combat damage with that creature, we get to blink a creature and search for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. Eldrazi Displacer is possibly one of the best blink cards in this deck. With this out, we can pay 1 colorless and 2 other mana to exile a creature and have it return tapped. This can be used to make it so that our opponent's creatures can't attack us, which is a nice added benefit, but we'll mostly use it to blink our own creatures. I also really like this card because as long as we have multiple sources of colorless mana, we can activate this ability multiple times in a single turn. Although it doesn't actually blink our cards, Panharmonicon is still going to help us get more ETB triggers since those triggers will trigger an additional time. A turn or 2 with this card on the battlefield will be devastating for our opponents. Finally, we have Restoration Angel and Felidar Guardian. When one of these creatures enters, we exile something and then immediately return it to the battlefield. These are good on their own, but when combined with Preston, they're even better. Let's take Felidar Guardian, for instance. If we cast Ephemerate to blink it, we'll target one of our tapped lands. This will also cause Preston to trigger, making a copy of Felidar Guardian. The copy is going to target the original Felidar Guardian. That ability will resolve, bringing the original back. It triggers again and we target another land. But this will also trigger Preston again, making yet another copy. Again, the copy exiles Felidar Guardian, blinking the original yet again. And we can do this over and over, infinitely untapping our lands for infinite mana. Then, if we introduce a Spirited Companion to the combo, we can draw our entire deck. Or, with Inquisitor Exarch on the battlefield, we can win the game by pinging our opponents to death. Glorious Protector works in a similar way, but only if we have Ashnod's Altar out there too. If Glorious Protector is blinked with Preston out, we make a copy of it. The copy will target the original Glorious Protector plus whatever other creatures we want to blink. Then when we sacrifice the copy to Ashnod's Altar, we get all of those creatures back, including the original Glorious Protector. Glorious Protector entering this way will again allow us to make a token copy of it, starting the sequence all over again. Now that we've covered just about everything in the deck, let's talk about our land base. We're running 25 basic Plains cards. Having all those plains works well with Emeria the Sky Ruin. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 7 or more plains, we can return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. If that happens, that will also trigger our commander, allowing us to make a 0/1 token copy of that creature. Next up, we have Arch of Araska and War Room. These two lands give us a way to spend extra mana to draw cards. With Arch of Araska, we can pay 5 and tap it to draw a card. However, we'll only be able to activate this if we have the City's Blessing. War Room, on the other hand, does not have that restriction, and it will only cost us 3 mana and 1 life to activate. Cryptic Cave can also draw us a card as long as we are okay with sacrificing it. This is really a last resort type of ability, but can be good if we're in a pinch. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx is a must-include in almost any monocolored deck. This land taps for colorless, but its second ability allows us to pay 2 and tap it to add an amount of mana equal to our devotion to a chosen color. If we have devotion of 4 or more, we're going to net mana with this ability. We're also running Reliquary Tower. When this is out, we won't be forced to discard down to 7 at the end of our turn. Eiganjo's Seat of the Empire is a legendary land that enters untapped and taps for 1 white. It also has a channel ability where we can pay 3 and discard it to deal 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. That ability will cost 1 less to cast for each legendary creature we control. This is a nice way to add some extra removal to our deck without really taking up a card slot, since you need lands in your deck anyways. And then we have a couple more colorless lands. Terrain Generator enters untapped and taps for a colorless. It also has an ability where we can pay 2 and tap it to put a basic land from our hand onto the battlefield. This is just another convenient way to add ramp to our deck in a color scheme that doesn't typically ramp very well. Strip Mine is a staple and will come in handy from time to time as a way to remove problematic lands. Finally, we're running 1 basic waste in this deck. I chose to do this because of Eldrazi Displacer. I wanted to make sure I had a colorless land that could be searched up with cards like Solemn Simulacrum in case we had Eldrazi Displacer but no colorless mana to activate the ability. So that's it. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. And if I missed anything, make sure to comment that too. Also, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any new deck techs. And as always, thanks for getting your fix with me today. Stay safe out there. Peace out, guys.